All right, 7:01 p.m. We're going to start this regular meeting of the Rutherford Board of Education, February 12, 2024. We'll ask everyone who can to please stand, face the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll ask Mr. Kelly to please take roll.
Mr. Bogosian?
Present.
Mrs. Cole?
Here.
Mr. Conti? Mr. Healy?
Here.
Mrs. Jones?
Present.
Mr. Mazzone?
Here.
Dr. Racine?
Here.
Mr. Sprayberry?
Present.
Dr. Owati?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meeting of public bodies at which any business affecting their interests is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the Rutherford Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place posted on the bulletin board outside the Borough Clerk's office, mailed to the Herald, South Bergenite, and the Record newspapers, and filed with the Borough Clerk. Hard copies of the agenda are available in the meeting room, and the agenda is posted electronically on Friday before the meeting date on the district's website at www.rutherfordschools.org. Subsequent to the meeting, a video of the meeting will be uploaded to the district's website, www.rutherfordschools.org. The video link can be found by opening the Board of Education link and clicking on Public Meetings and then Videos. Board members, in your packets, there were two sets of minutes to approve, one of the regular meeting and the other of the executive session of the January 22nd, 2024 meeting. Any questions or comments on those sets of meeting minutes? Seeing none, I'll ask Mr. Kelly to please enter those. Our student representative is not here, so we are going to move to our next piece, which is a special presentation. I want to welcome Matt Lee back. It's been a little bit of time, but we're happy to have you back to do a presentation for us this evening on board ethics. Matt Lee's Bergen County Field Representative from the New Jersey School Boards Association. So, Mr. Lee, welcome, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we have to hang on 1 second till we get our presentation on.
No problem. So, yeah, we're actually going to move to the report of the superintendent, and then we'll come back to the special presentation.
Thank you. A brief report tonight, a couple of updates, which I think I included most of these in my message communication to you, but congratulations to the high school consumer bowl team. They once again won the Bergen County competition. I believe that's twice in the last 3 years that they won the competition, and that's against all schools in Bergen County, and they move on to the regional, and that is essentially a competition involving consumer finance and business and things of that nature. The academic decathlon team that we've had so much success with over the last, I guess, 15 years or so, won the region once again, and they'll be competing in the state. And they had a very strong showing in the region, so they go into the state with a very high score. It doesn't carry over, but it does bode well for them in state competition, which is the end of February, I believe, is the competition. Last weekend of February is their competition, or it was probably the beginning of March, that February 29th weekend. Also, I want to mention that our athletic teams from the high school are now getting towards that part of the season when state tournaments will be coming and competitions such as that. We've had some very successful seasons with all of our sports, our swim team, our basketball team, wrestling. We have some league champions in there, track, doing very well. So all of our bowling, all of our teams have done very well this season. And there's still several weeks for most of the sports left in the season. Some are kind of winding down, but some are continuing. School is closed on Friday of this week, and on Monday, that school is also closed, and the district's closed. It's a very short winter recess weekend for President's Day weekend. I included in the packet for all of you the mid-year goal report. A lot of if you had a chance to look at it, that's basically for your knowledge and information. A great deal of it was discussed directly or indirectly the night we had the various administrators and supervisors here to talk about the committee reports. A lot of that, you'll see consistency in that report. But if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer. And you know, we have a significant weather event supposedly happening tomorrow, so we'll be opening the envelope at 9 o'clock tonight to let everybody know what's going on tomorrow. Okay. I do want to mention one other thing. Bergen County, the New Jersey School Boards Association, through Bergen County's group, does an Unsung Hero Award every year. Schools get the opportunity to nominate a high school student. We have nominated one. They are going to be honored. It's March 5th, 6:30 to 8:30. The event is held, and it's going to be at Beckton High School in their Performing Arts Center, their auditorium. So I will send you all tomorrow the link. You may have gotten it from school boards already, but I'll send it to you. And if anyone is planning on going, would like to go, it's a good event. But also, I'd like someone maybe to, if anyone's planning on going, they prefer, it's nice to have a board member present the honor to the student. So if you're interested in going, you can complete the form. If you're interested in presenting it, you could let me know. If there's a problem with anybody being able to attend, we'll make sure then that somebody from the high school is there. But being it is a school board association event, a school board association award, it would be nice if someone would go. So I'll email you all the link, and you can fill out the form if you're interested in going. But if you're interested in presenting, you know, let me know. And it may even indicate down the form. For a place for you to say that. I didn't open the form up, but okay. And that's it. So you'll be getting that from me tomorrow. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hurley. Questions or comments from board members? All right, hearing none. Mr. Lee, we welcome you back, and we will turn it over to you. I'll get out of the way here.
Thank you, Mr. Alati. Good evening, Rutherford Board. It's been a while since I've been here. It's nice to see you all. Wanted to just kind of give you a little bit of overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. The New Jersey CUSAC monitoring system requires in its governance review of the district's operations that boards of education review the Code of Ethics once a year. And often boards do that at reorganization just by reading through the 10 tenets. But our aim with this presentation is to give you a lot more sort of depth and a lot more of the most recent advisories and cases that have been put forth by the School Ethics Commission. So that's what we're going to discuss tonight. Please, if you have questions or comments as we go through, just let me know and we can discuss those things. So I'm going to begin with a discussion about the School Ethics Act, which is where all of this sort of guidance comes from. The School Ethics Act was passed in 1991, and basically its aim was to ensure that the local boards of education and administrators hold the respect and the confidence of the people they are serving. And it advises board members to avoid conduct that's in violation of the public trust or conduct which may create a justifiable impression that the public trust is being violated. And we'll talk about that as we go help School Ethics Act established a number of sort of institutions, if you will, to help board members stay in compliance with the School Ethics Act. If you look at the chart that we see there, it starts in the upper left with the School Ethics Commission. We'll talk a lot about that. Prohibited acts, which sometimes is referred to as conflicts of interest, those were established and defined. Mandatory training requirements were put in place for Board of Education members. The Code of Ethics came about in 2001, 9 years later, and was interestingly based on an NJSBA Code of Ethics, which its members adopted for themselves back in the 1970s. And finally, the need for disclosure statements, those personal, relative, and financial disclosure statements that board members fill out annually. There's a question about who is accountable to the School Ethics Act, and it's interesting that those provisions will apply, some provisions will apply to all school officials, and that is to pay attention to those conflicts of interest or prohibited acts that we'll discuss a little bit further in detail, and also the disclosure statements that we referenced earlier. Those things apply to all school officials, so that's board members. It's also NJSBA, interestingly enough, and it's also administrators who serve in local districts. Provisions that apply only to board members are adherence to the Code of Ethics and also the mandatory training requirements. And once again, those are public school board members and also charter school trustees, because of course charter schools are funded by public money as well. So we referenced the School Ethics Commission earlier, and the School Ethics Commission is the body that is charged with enforcing the act. The composition of the Ethics Commission is 9 members appointed for 3-year terms by the governor. There's no more than 5 from any one political party. There are always 5 non-school officials that have been appointed to the board, 2 school board members and 2 school administrators. The interesting thing about the commission is that it is not always fully staffed, and that has an implication on our next slide. When we talk about the output of this SEC, there are 2 main thrusts of their work. The first is advisory opinions, and those are requested only by a school official, and they are about proposed conduct or activity that a board member or school official might engage in. And the idea there is that the SEC can weigh in on whether or not that proposed conduct, if followed through, would violate somehow the act or the code. And you see that little note at the bottom of the left-hand part of the slide. It says can be made public. It needs 6 votes of the SEC in order to be made public. Well, in times past, the SEC has been down to only 5 sitting members, which would mean that it would be impossible to get 6 votes to make an advisory opinion public and therefore provide guidance to the rest of the state. And at times when that body becomes fully staffed, there are a number of advisories that are released at once because there's sort of a backlog. And that can send a lot of districts scrambling to figure out ways to ensure that board members know how to stay compliant with the latest advice. The other main thrust of the SEC's work is judging ethics complaints. Those complaints, in contrast to advisory opinions, can be filed by anyone. So a member of the public, a staff member, an administrator, another board member. Those allege that some kind of a violation of the School Ethics Act has taken place. And just to give you a sense of what the volume is that the SEC deals with annually, there are typically 85 ethics complaints filed in a given year and 35 advisory opinions requested. We talked about mandatory training a little bit earlier, and this is a place where there's been a change recently in what's required of board members. You can see from the sort of middle of that slide that the mandatory training is titled Governance 1, 2, 3, and 4. Governance 1, 2, and 3 are taken in the first 3 years of board service. They deal with basic knowledge and skills in Governance 1, then finance and labor, so negotiations in Governance 2, and Governance 3 is about student achievement. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see Governance 4, and that is taken by every board member in the first year of any subsequent term to their first term. And that is essentially a legal update. The thing to note about mandatory training is that Governance 1 is now required for new board members in the first 90 days of service. Every other level of mandatory training, you have a full year to comply. But with Governance 1, you must now do it within the first 90 days. NJSBA is the only provider of mandatory training, and we have a number of different ways that we do that. There is in-person, which we highly recommend because it gives you a lot of opportunity to have discussion and dialogue with other board members and the instructors. There is a live virtual option that will allow board members to attend via an online platform, and they must complete all 3 phases of that in order to get credit for it. So 3 different evenings of a couple hours each. If you miss one, you will have to either start again or use a different platform to fulfill your obligation. The last one is a self-paced online that checks the box, but is sort of the least amount of information, the least amount of participation. The disclosure statements we referenced earlier are about personal/relative and financial disclosure statements, and they basically talk about whether or not a board member or an administrator has a relative working in the district that may have some implication on how they can participate. And also, the financial disclosure is whether or not the board member or the administrator might have some financial involvement with the district, whether that be a company they work for or some other involvement that might have an impact, once again, on how they can participate. New school officials need to file that disclosure statement within 30 days of the start of employment or taking office, and returning school officials have an April 30 deadline to fill out their disclosure statements. When we talk about the SEC and ethics violations, there's a series of penalties that can be imposed by the commissioner if the SEC finds there's been a violation that's taken place. The SEC will make a recommendation to the commissioner based on the facts of the case. The commissioner has the final decision. Starting at the top of the slide, we see a reprimand. A reprimand is the least serious of those penalties that can be imposed. It is essentially a written rebuke by the commissioner. It does not result in a formal resolution. And that is in contrast to a censure, which is also a formal note of disapproval by the commissioner, but that is publicized by the adoption of a resolution by the local board to acknowledge that that penalty has been imposed. The next 2 pieces are a suspension and a removal, fairly self-explanatory. A suspension means they are barred from engaging in any activity for a designated period of time, typically between 30 and 180 days. And the last one is removal, which would be immediate termination from board service. The next set of slides are basically a recounting of the Code of Ethics. Since you guys have reviewed that at your reorganization meeting, I will not go through those tenets right now, but I would like to point out, when you do get a copy of this from the board secretary, that at the bottom of each of the slides is a set of standards. Those standards reflect the actual language that the SEC is going to be using to determine whether or not some type of activity has violated the code. So just be aware that that is really good guidance as to whether or not the circumstances of a particular case might have warranted a violation to be found. Come on. There we go. All right. So I want to walk through a number of cases here, and the ones that we're highlighting this year are ones that are illustrative of violations of Tenet E of the Code of Ethics, and in particular, the clause in there that says, nor take any private action that may compromise the board. And you can infer from this that there's been a number of these instances lately that have caused the SEC to take action and cause us to highlight these in particular. When you look at the citation, starting with the first bullet point, you'll see C98-21. The C means that this is a commissioner's decision. So in other words, this has gone through all of the SEC work and been referred to the commissioner, either with a recommendation or in some cases, the commissioner has already acted on these. So these are sort of high-level details of the case. At the end of the presentation, there's some links where you can read the full documents if you're ever bored one day. So C98-21, in this case, a member copied and pasted info from a board email and sent those non-public contents to officials of their township. The SEC found that that action revealed the board's intercommunication and that had potential to compromise the board. And it was also considered confidential information because the board had not yet voted on those contents. The recommendation there was a reprimand to be issued to the member in violation. In C59-20, and by the way, the -20, the -21 indicates the year that these cases were instituted. So in this one, a member sent email from district account to a known political entity and misrepresented the intent of a rally that was taking place. The content suggested political motivations and also invited only one side of the issue. Using the board email, the SEC advised can give the impression that statements were made on behalf of the board. So that's something we'll talk about a little bit more in depth as we go further. In that case, a reprimand was recommended and issued and imposed by the commissioner. In C20-20, on this member's own, the member contacted vendors and districts for prices to go from MacBooks to Chromebooks. The SEC advised that a member can express disagreement at a board meeting, but it was inappropriate for a board member to go out and conduct an investigation on their own. As we see throughout the Code of Ethics, board members do not run the district. Board members ensure that the district is well run. The next case, C58-21. In this case, a board member used a board email to express personal views on mask mandates and encourage some action be taken in opposition to that. That personal view on board email was sent to state legislature and members of the public. Board members expressing personal views should not be done on within the purview of the board member's role. And we'll talk more about how board members can express their opinions in public as we go further. C86-21, in this case, there were two incidents. A member, at the request of the union president, sent an email to the board and an administrative assistant accusing the superintendent of changing graduation date due to a personal conflict. That same member, as the secretary of some local organization, was told by the principal that a chorus wouldn't be at an annual event and texted the chorus teacher to question why. The request for the explanation from a subordinate was considered to be administering the schools. We often ask this question in training: how many people work for the board? Right, just one. The board employs the superintendent. Everyone else in the district works for the superintendent. And therefore, if there are questions around an employee's conduct, that investigation and that the outcomes of any discipline that might happen there is the purview of the superintendent and the superintendent alone. C58-21, a board member met with members of the public on her own for a walk-on motion, to justify a walk-on motion of a highly divisive board action to change a holiday name. This independent action undermined the board's decision-making because it's up to the board to publicly discuss and/or explain the rationale for making its decisions, and it undermined the administration's authority and imposed unnecessary strain on the administration-board relationship, Once again, a reprimand was issued there. In CO 4-20, the day after the board president lost election, directed the board council to conduct research on another board member who campaigned against him, and took private action and used the position to secure an unwarranted privilege for himself. In that case, a censure was recommended. Oh, sorry. So we talked about prohibited acts before, and another way we reference those is conflicts of interest. So if the conditions that we see delineated there with the letter designations exist for a board member, so they may have some kind of a business interest or some kind of unwarranted gain or privilege that might take place for them or for a member of their immediate family, board members would have no discussion and no voting over those issues. They need to remove themselves completely from involvement in those things. There's been discussion lately about the difference between an abstention and a recusal. So when a conflicted board member votes, they need to recuse themselves from discussion and vote, not abstain. Just abstaining on a matter isn't sufficient to acknowledge the fact that the board member has a legal conflict and is not eligible to discuss or vote. So an abstention, it doesn't cover the board member in that case. They need to recuse, in other words, no discussion, and they also need to refrain from voting. If board members have questions about whether or not a conflict exists for them based on their personal circumstances, that is something that the board attorney should be able to help the board member with. Certainly NJSBA can give some guidance, as well as we do have an attorney of the day service that members can access. Relationship definitions are sort of one of the key metrics by which you can measure whether or not a conflict exists. And defining what those relationships mean is important to that. An immediate family member is described in code as a spouse, civil union, domestic partner, or dependent child residing in the same household. A relative, which is obviously a much bigger scope, has all of those classifications that you see following the colon under relative. And if you look at the end of that paragraph or that bullet point, you can see that that's whether related to the board member or their spouse or partner by blood, marriage, or adoption. So again, any questions about your specific circumstances, your board attorney should be able to help. This is just a sampling of what came out of an advisory opinion in 2023, where the SEC endeavored to basically address every single permutation of a relative, or a relationship, I should say, to determine whether or not there's a conflict. That is just a sample. The link there goes to a PDF where you can see the entire list, once again, whenever you get bored. Okay. So we talked about hiring and personnel. And of course, board members cannot participate in hiring either a relative of themselves or a relative of the administrator. But of course, board members can be elected to serve on a board, and superintendents can be hired into a district where a board member is already, or excuse me, a relative is already on the board. So if that's the case, and an administrator is hired into a district where they have a relative on the board, or a relative who works in the district, I should say, the administrator can't exercise direct or indirect authority over that relative. Someone else would have to be in charge of supervision and evaluation. If a board member is in place, if a relative is in place and a board member comes on, they can't take part in any employment matters concerning that employee or anybody in that employee's chain of command between them and the superintendent. They also cannot take part in any personnel and matters involving the superintendent up to and including a superintendent search. They could take part in no aspect of a superintendent search if they have a relative in the district. We talked about negotiations before, and this chart is pretty handy when it comes to helping you decide whether or not you may have a conflict. The chart is basically 4 columns. In the first column, we define the relationship to a board member. In the second column, whether or not that person is a current member of a statewide teachers union. And then the next 2 columns, participate in negotiations, yes or no, vote to ratify the contract, yes or no. In row 1, a spouse, dependent child who's not a dependent, or a relative who works in a district, it's a no on both counts. No negotiations, no voting. In row 2, if yourself, your spouse, or dependent child works out of district and is in a statewide public teachers union, you may not participate in negotiations still, but you may, absent another conflict, vote. Once all of the terms of the contract are settled, you can be briefed on the contract terms and then vote. In the last row, a child who's not a dependent or a relative who works out of district but is in a teachers union, you may now participate in negotiations and you may vote to ratify the contract, once again, absent another conflict. And the other conflict is typically heightened union involvement, which would mean that that relative is a building rep or is a negotiator or is an officer in their own local. Yeah, Sergio.
Does that relate just to the educators union in terms of negotiations, or also supervisors and administrators?
They correspond. So if the relative is a supervisor, when the supervisor's contract comes up, same thing.
Okay, but they can negotiate across other
Yes.
bargaining units? Okay.
Yes. The other fairly recent change is this piece here, A10-18. In that advisory opinion from 2018, it said that endorsement of a candidate by a local or statewide union doesn't create a per se future conflict unless a financial contribution is given and is intended to influence the member. In prior advice, board members who were endorsed by the local, whether or not there was a financial contribution, were advised to stay away from negotiations for the first year of their term. Here are some advisory opinions or cases that are related to conflicts. So in A10-23, a board member's child worked in the district aftercare program, and the supervisor was a teacher who reported to the principal. The question was, is there a conflict there? And the SEC advice was that yes, that person needed to recuse from any and all matters related to the superintendent and the supervisor in the chain of command and the union. In AO2-23, in this case, the spouse of a board member was a councilman in the borough and wanted to know whether she could participate in the hiring of an SRO officer. And in this case, they said that the actual or perceived personal or financial involvement of the spouse that could violate it was something that could violate the public confidence. So was advised at that point to recuse from any and all matters related to the borough. The next one is a commissioner decision, C80-22. In this case, the wife works in the district, mistakenly voted to renew the CSA's contract in a block of 48 items. Within that vote, the board member in question actually abstained from another item in that block of 48 items, but did not abstain from voting for the superintendent's contract. Because there was a potential for conflict, actual or perceived, a reprimand was issued in that case. AO1-23, this advisory opinion said, asked whether a board member can continue to work for a food service vendor as a quote unquote lunch lady in the district. And because the nature of this person's employment had them in schools for up to 6 hours a day, it was said that the SEC recommended that person be reassigned, and had to recuse from any and all discussion and votes, including competing vendors, et cetera, because of the scope of that person's service in the district. A08-23 said the town was entering into a contract with a firm to upgrade tennis courts shared with the school, and they were placed on school grounds. And the question was, can the board member's firm be a subcontractor? And surprisingly enough, the answer there was yes, but that person was not able to have any more standing or benefit as any other contractor that bid on that work. The SEC advised for someone else to physically perform that work, and that board member was not to have any authority over staff and to advise the superintendent of his or her activities within that project. The last one, C81-20, is a commissioner decision. In this case, a board member who is the borough CFO voted to approve a shared service agreement with the borough for maintenance activities. The SEC said that the board member had a direct or indirect financial involvement in the activities within that program, and needed to basically abstain from that kind of involvement, and a reprimand was issued there. There's a couple of cases here from A05-23 related to a board president's standing. In this case, the board president's child was an instructional assistant in the district. And the question was, could that board president, without conflict, appoint committee chairs and members to committees that would deal with issues around that employee? And it was said that no, that board president could not choose the chair or the members of the committees and or serve on any committee that remotely touched upon that employee's working. And the second one is that the board member's spouse was a 10-month employee in the tech department, and once again cannot be involved in any and all matters, including serving on committees that remotely touched upon that employee's work. When it comes to executive session and a relative who works in a district, a couple of commissioner decisions to draw your attention to. C87-21. In this case, a member attended executive session discussion on candidates to fill a vacant board seat. And in this case, that board member's husband applied, and that person did not recuse herself. So a censure was issued in that case. And in C09-20, a board president attended multiple discussions on a matter involving an immediate family member. In this case, other board members were unaware of the identity in both cases. Counsel was consulted first. So important thing here that even if counsel is consulted and you're given advice as a board member, you could still be found to have violated the code or the act. In explaining those two censures, it said when a board member with conflict goes behind closed doors, it creates that justifiable impression that public trust is being violated. It may give that board member an unwarranted privilege or advantage. The member's presence, especially if the conflict is known by the rest of the board, could affect the discussion. And in the end, members are responsible for their own actions with a duty to act prudently and cautiously. This is a very recent set of circumstances that came out around the advice of counsel defense that we referenced on the prior slide. So in years past, the even if a board member was advised to act a certain way by their board attorney, they could still be found to have violated their code or the act, and they could also be assessed penalties for that activity. Very recently, though, this advice of counsel defense was basically legitimized, if you will, on certain conditions. And the conditions are that the approval or advice was received prior to the action, that the individual who offered the advice possessed authority or responsibility with regard to ethical issues, that the individual seeking the advice or approval made a full disclosure of all the facts within that case, and that the individual complied with the advice received, including any restrictions. Now, if all four of these conditions are met, the advice of counsel defense can be met, and that might save a board member from a penalty that might be imposed, but they could still be found in violation of the code or the act. From volunteering activities for board members, basically board members who are engaged with outside organizations, there's no limitation to board members doing that. So board members can still be on PTAs and booster clubs and even be officers in those kinds of organizations. But when it comes to volunteering out of those organizations, there are some limitations for board members. Basically, board members can only be involved in activities that are classified as non-executive types of activities and infrequent activities. So they can't be involved to the degree that they're giving direction to students or staff. They can't have any involvement with handling school funds. And they can't be in the building on a regular basis. So what they call enmeshed in the building. So if board members are showing up to do volunteer activity on a consistent basis, such that somebody could walk in after seeing them a couple of times and mistake them for an employee, they're in the buildings way too much. If you are going to do volunteer activity, so something like reading on Dr. Seuss Day would be a very appropriate volunteer activity for a board member. Let the superintendent know you're going to be in the schools. Obviously, a board member's presence in the school is noted. So superintendent should be aware that that may be happening. Go in, perform that volunteer activity, and then take your leave. It's not an opportunity for board members to go check up on things. And while you're in the building for those kinds of activities, or even if you're there for a parent-teacher conference, you should refrain from any board-related discussion. So when it comes to voting, in advisory opinion 1222, it was asked if a board member would violate the act if they voted affirmatively to refuse to implement the New Jersey Student Learning Standards for comprehensive health and physical education. The SEC response is very much related to Tenet A of the Code of Ethics, which says that as a school official, you're obligated to obey the laws, rules, and regulations promulgated by the State Board of Education. And in this case, of course, if you did vote in that way, you could be found to have violated Tenet A of the Code of Ethics. Social media, there's a lot to talk about with social media, as you may imagine. The most important thing is that board members shouldn't be commenting in a way that they could be perceived to be speaking for the board. And part of the way to do that is to use a disclosure statement. And these are rules that were promulgated way before social media even existed. So back when letters to the editor were the only way you made your opinion known, you were meant to apply a disclaimer statement to anything that you had published. And basically, it is what the SEC has recommended, which you see in bold and italic. And by the way, they do recommend that you put it in bold and italic. And basically, this says that the comments are being made in your capacity as a private citizen and not in your capacity as a board member, and that the statements are not representative of the board or its members and solely represent your own personal opinions. Given that, there are some questions that we hear often around those disclaimer statements. And they are, as you see there, if you use a disclaimer, does that automatically protect you from being in violation? No, it doesn't, but it does help clarify in which capacity you're speaking. What could cause you to be in violation if you do use a disclaimer? And basically it comes down to the content of what your statements are. So if a reasonable member of the public could think that you are speaking in your official capacity or pursuant to your official duties, that could make the disclaimer inadequate. If I don't use a disclaimer, does that mean I'm automatically in violation? No. Once again, it's the content and the perception. And lastly, must you use the disclaimer exactly? No, but you should hit all of the salient points of the disclaimer. In AO2-22, a board member asked if, as a private citizen, it would violate the act if they answered operational questions about the district on a Facebook page. Well, are board members responsible for the operational aspects of the district? No, they are not. So should board members be speaking on that? No, they should not. Okay? I think we all get that. Okay. Some other sort of general guidance about social media. It's quite frequent that folks who are campaigning for a seat on the board will create a campaign page on various social media platforms. You are advised that you should not use those campaign media pages after you become a seated board member because it clouds the perspective from which you are speaking. Also, they want you to avoid social media accounts that inherently indicate that you are a board member, once again, because you can be mistaken to be speaking for the board when you don't have authority to. The liking or sharing of a social media post isn't in and of itself enough to find you in violation, but once again, you do have to be very cognizant of the content that you are liking or sharing. Also, at the very bottom of that slide, the SEC took pains to basically say that they don't have the ability to control sort of off-color language by board members, but they do remind you that conduct that derogates from the mission of the board should not be something board members engage in. And lastly, they also reminded board members that the public ultimately decides who can best serve their community, and your actions can play a role in their decisions. Couple last points. If you have conflicts, well, either way, boards should develop a list of members with conflicts and basically take stock of whether conflicts exist for any of their members periodically. Your board attorney, once again, is your best resource for identifying any ethics issues you might have or any conflicts. And School Board Notes does publish advisory opinions as they are released by the SEC. And that's a good resource to keep you up to date. And these links here, once again, are ways you can look into the details on some of the cases that we highlighted today. So, Mr. President, that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, happy to entertain them.
Well, first, I want to say thank you. That was very comprehensive. I really appreciated the case studies and some of the specifics there, for sure. Start with reactions, comments, questions from board members. Anything stand out? Diane? Ms. Jones?
Yes.
I have it. I can send it to you.
Thank you. One more question.
Sure.
A board member that becomes a certified, a board that becomes a certified,
Uh-huh.
what procedures do they have to do? I know go to a certain amount of meetings, right?
For the board or for individual board members? Yeah, so basically, you become a certified board by doing in-district training. So it would be myself as the Bergen County field rep, mostly coming here and doing programs like this. It's required that you do 16 hours of that kind of training within a 4-year period in order to gain certification. There's also a few other things about, having your policies looked at and your contract analyzed and supplying your contract data to our database. And of course, ensuring that no member of the board is in conflict with the Code of Ethics. That's on our website. So if you look under Board Member Academy, you can see all of the requirements for both board level and individual level certifications. Sure.
Other questions? Comments? Just one clarification. So if you have a social media account, you're suggesting in your profile or background information, you should not put that you are a member of a Board of Education.
Right.
Okay.
And the idea of there, of course, is that once you identify yourself in that way, a reasonable member of the public could infer that you are speaking in some way, shape, or form for the board.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts? Ms. Reilly?
One question about, Matt, you mentioned about the abstaining, recusing versus abstaining.
Yes.
If an item comes up, like a financial item for our expense reimbursement,
Mhm.
are you saying we should recuse ourselves from that one item, or is abstaining sufficient?
I would say you're probably safe to vote on that because it's not giving you any undue advantage or privilege. You're merely being reimbursed per district policy for those things that you expended money on. But if you have any doubts, your board attorney can answer that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions or comments? All right, well, hearing none, I want to say thank you, Mr. Lee. It was very informative and helpful. I'm glad to know we can have the information slides as a follow-up.
Okay, nice to be here again. Mr. Kelly, I will leave this on the table. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. So we're going to shuffle a little bit and go now to the report of the student representative. Thanks again, Poppy Bimson. Happy to have you here and turn the floor over to you.
Good evening. I apologize for coming late tonight, but nonetheless, I'm happy to be back and reporting for the accomplishments and future events of RHS. To start on the academic side, many seniors received early decision and early action decisions in the past month for their colleges and regular admissions coming around March. Similarly, juniors preparing for the NJGPA test coming the next month and AP season. On the athletic side, RHS student athletes are beginning to wrap up their winter seasons. The next few weeks are highly anticipated, including specific track members in the state group meets this upcoming weekend and the girls basketball and the secondary Bergen County tournament. Some very exciting news comes from the boys and girls swim team. So the boys won the NJIC conference meet and the girls took second. Similarly, spring sports registration is now open for student athletes eager to carry these victories into the spring. RHS students have been kept very busy with extracurriculars. So to name a few, the computer club led younger students in the Hour of Code to spread interest in younger generations of the Rutherford School District in STEM initiatives. The FBLA club had select students win at the regional competition. Ms. Bott and Mrs. Leonard had 45 students participate in NJ Future Business Leaders of America Club Northern Regional Competition, and 6 winners in their respective business-related competitions won. Heroes and Cool Kids continue their trips to Vermont School to educate 6th graders about substance abuse and how to build their character. The band and choir held cafe night at the high school where they performed in groups or as solos for fundraising. And finally, the RHS drama is preparing for the spring musical The Lightning Thief, the Percy Jackson musical, which will be held on March 15th and 16th at the high school. That's all I have for the past 2 months, and I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you. Ms. Jones?
What is the play that they're doing this year?
Percy Jackson, so it's a book series and a movie series.
Other questions or comments? Well, thank you, as always, for a comprehensive report. We appreciate hearing what's going on.
Yeah.
Very excited for the seniors and all the exciting stuff going on for everyone else. All right, well, you can feel free to stay if you have other things that you need to attend to this evening, like homework and all that good stuff. We understand.
Thank
But thank you.
You just get back on track.
you. No, on Wednesdays next.
All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Hurley for an additional piece to his report.
Right, when I did my report earlier, I failed to mention what's embedded in the agenda, which is the midpoint report of incidents which are recorded in terms of violence, vandalism, substance, or other incidents leading to suspensions and HIBs, and also HIB trainings and programs. And something new in the report this year, restraint and seclusion, if that has to be done, and as you'll see, that has not had to be done. There's none of those reports, no incidents to be reported. As I say every year, the incident totals are not high, considering the number of students, the number of schools, the number of school days. And in terms of the ones in terms of violence, which would be a fight, an altercation, or 2, 7 substance, 1 weapon, which was a pen knife that was brought in elementary school. 5 HIB confirms and the ones that are reported. And a reminder that the trainings and HIBs are for staff, the programs are for students. Okay? So, report's there. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer it. I have to report both the midpoint, then again at the end of the year, and then again when it's sent back to us and certified by the state. So these reports get done 3 times throughout the year. Okay?
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments about that? All right, hearing none, we'll move on now to the report of the president. Just keep it brief. I wanted to acknowledge and thank Mr. Hurley and Mr. Kelly on the preliminary work they've been doing on the budget for this coming year, and how they integrate strategically what are the priorities for the next year in the Finance Committee and Buildings and Grounds Committee related to building projects and whatnot. So that's going well. I wanted to acknowledge that for the public and thank the committees for their great work on that so far and asking any clarifying questions that are relevant. Also wanted to thank Mr. Hurley for the mid-year report on district goals that were submitted. So it's a nice check-in on where things are, and also a good reinforcement after the last board meeting where we had presentations from the different supervisors and administrators on the different academic committees that are working on the structure and content of curriculum in various areas. Everything else, and 1 or 2 other things I was going to say, but Mr. Hurley took those in his report. So always want to celebrate and acknowledge our students, the RHS Consumer Bowl team, academic decathlon team. A lot of great stuff going on. So congratulations to all those students. Any questions or comments from board members? All right, hearing none, then we are going to open the meeting to the public for the first time this evening for anything related to the board agenda. There any things related to the board agenda this evening? All right, hearing none. At 8 p.m., we'll close the meeting to the public, and we're going to move on to new business where there's action to be taken. And we will start with personnel. Ms. Cole.
Good evening. I got the good mic. There will be 21 motions to put forward tonight. Number 1, to accept the retirement of the Audrey Mayfield with regret. Number 2, to accept the retirement of Patricia Germain with regret. Number 3, to accept the retirement of Lynn Latore with regret. Number 4, to accept the retirement of Nancy Brundage with regret. And number 5, to accept the retirement of Irina Driva with regret. Number 6, to accept the resignation of a teacher at Union Middle School. Number 7, to approve the termination, effective the 60-day notice of termination as of April 2nd, 2024. Number 8, to approve the following teachers as listed as part of the teacher-to-teacher program. Number 9, to approve the ELA summer enrichment teacher. Number 10, to approve the math summer enrichment teacher. Number 11, to approve an increase in the hourly wage for Alexandra Medina. Number 12, to approve a disability leave for employee 2843. Number 13, to approve the following coaching assignments and stipends for the Rutherford High School assistant boys lacrosse coach. Number 14, to approve the following middle school co-curricular assignments and stipends as listed. Number 15, to approve Lauren Connellan as the substitute nurse. Number 16, to approve Mary Murphy as the substitute registrar. Number 17, to approve the following substitute teachers as listed. Number 18, to approve the following substitute teacher assistants as listed. Number 19, to approve the following internship clinical placements in the Rutherford Public School District as listed. And number 21 on the addendum, to approve Julie that's a hard one, Wasilewski, I hope I said that right, as a biology teacher for the Rutherford High School. This is a replacement position.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Cole. Questions or comments from board members?
If I could, on number 18, 17 and 18, the substitute list, we're going to add Julie Wasilewski, the teacher is being approved, number 21, for beginning to work next school year. We're going to add her name, Mr. Kelly, to the minutes. Put her on a substitute teacher list and substitute teacher assistant list. Okay?
And I omitted number 20 for travel reimbursements, to approve the following travel reimbursements as listed.
I'd also like to comment briefly on the additional retirements. We have 5 tonight, and those 5 individuals probably average over 30 years each in the district, and have been mainstays in their departments, the buildings. We have a very important person up in the board office who's our account payable person. Think about the district and the $50 million budget, and she's the department for accounts payable. And 2 head custodians here at the high school and 1 at the K Center, and teacher in our science department who's been outstanding teacher, and at Lincoln School an outstanding teacher, both of them well over 30 years. So we're up to 16 retirements. And of course, we'll have a lot more to say about all these folks as the year goes.
I was going to say that end of the year staff party is going to be
We'll work.
a good one.
Yeah, we'll work. It's going to be multimedia present.
All right, questions or comments from board members?
Other than we're losing some really wonderful teachers, people, I've known many of them for a long time. Some go back to the 80s. Yeah, they're really wonderful. I wish them best. We'll miss them.
Yep. All right, Mrs. Cole, do you want to move those?
Sure. I would like to move motions 1 to 21.
All right, thank you. We have a second. Mr. Sprayberry, any last questions or comments? Hearing none. Mr. Kelly, please take roll.
Mr. Bogosian,
Abstain on 19, yes on all others.
Mrs. Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone,
Abstain on 15, yes to all others.
Dr. Racine,
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry,
Yes.
Dr. Oladi.
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll move on now to curriculum and instruction. Mrs. Jones?
Thank you. We did not have a CNI meeting. I And tonight, there are 7 motions put forth on the recommendation of the superintendent. 1, out-of-district placements. 2, field trips totaling $112. 3, school improvement panel. This is for the 23-24 year. 4, service provider, which is a doctor for neurodevelopment evaluations. 5 and 6 are HIV, and 7 is home instruction for 2 students.
Okay, thank you. So just a reference, these should be moved as 1 through 7.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, the numbers there apply to
Yep.
what was before, but they're 1 through 7.
All right, thank you. Questions or comments? All right, hearing none. Mr. Jones, you want to move those?
I move resolutions 1 through 7 under curriculum and instruction.
All right, do we have a second? Mr. Bogosian, any last questions or comments? Hearing none, Mr. Kelly, please take roll.
Mr. Bogosian,
Yes.
Mrs. Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone,
Yes.
Dr. Racine,
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry,
Yes.
Dr. Awadi.
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll move on now to finance. Mr. Bogosian.
So we did not have a finance committee meeting since our last full board meeting. Tonight on the agenda, we have 7 motions to consider. Number 1 is the routine approval of bills. Number 2 is the January treasurer's report. Number 3 is budget line transfers. Number 4 is to accept the proposal from Laura Bishop Communications. Number 5 is a cooperative purchasing agreement. Number 6 is to accept the the NJDSA grant. And number 7 is to accept the contracted service agreement with the South Bergen Jointure.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments on any of those? Questions? All right, and Mr. Bogosian, you want to move those?
I'd like to move motions 1 through 7 under finance.
All right, we have a second. Mr. Healy, any last questions or comments? Hearing none, Mr. Kelly, please take roll.
Mr. Bogosian,
Yes.
Mrs. Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone,
Yes.
Dr. Racine,
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry,
Yes.
Dr. Awadi.
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on now to policy. Mr. Healy.
Yes, we did not have a policy committee meeting since our last board meeting. As a second reading, there is 1 resolution with 1 policy and 2 regulations being put forth this evening as listed.
Okay. So this is the second reading for those. Questions or comments on that?
One comment on, and again, it's not a major issue. There was a phrase left out and one of the policy on in the grading regulation, and on page 5 of 8, it's lumped under the category for grades 7 to 12, but the change should be for the final exams. It should say beginning with the 24-25 school year in grades 9 to 12. And we'll change that in the policy before it gets posted, because the final exams and the midterm exams are occurring grades 9 to 12, not in grades 7 and 8.
Okay.
So that will be noted before the policy gets posted after, assuming it's approved on the 7th. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right, so with that change, Mr. Healy, do you want to move that?
Yes, I'd like to move the 1 resolution.
All right, and we have a second. Mr. Mazzone, any last questions or comments? Hearing none, Mr. Kelly, please take roll.
Mr. Bogosian,
Yes.
Mrs. Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone,
Yes.
Dr. Racine,
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry,
Yes.
Dr. Awadi.
Yes.
Motion approved. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on now to buildings and grounds. Mr. Sprayberry.
Good evening. We did have a buildings and ground committee meeting this month. I would like to take a minute and thank Mr. Kelly, Mr. Gamboa, and Mr. Hurley for showing you all presented budget on the building stuff. what you guys have done with our budget, what we have, and our agent school district is just a great job. And the school district has always done. Important enough to the district. When it's getting done, waiting, it's great to be a part of one. Thank you, my God. We have one motion for Union Middle School for change order credit. And I'd like to move that to the board of school.
All right, thank you. Any questions from board members? All right, hearing none. Mr. Sprayberry moved that. Do we have a second? Dr. Racine, any last questions or comments? Hearing none. Mr. Kelly, please take roll.
Mr. Bogosian?
Yes.
Mrs. Cole?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone?
Yes.
Dr. Racine?
Yes.
Mr. Sprayberry?
Yes.
Dr. Oladi?
Yes.
Motion carried. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We will move on now to old business. Is there any old business board members would like to bring up? No old business this evening? All right, then we will move on to legislative update. Ms. Jones, anything for us?
This is a Senate Bill number 2599, introduced on February 8th, 2024, which is just last week. Shirley Hay Turner is a representative from District 15, which is in Huntington and Mercer. Raises the age requirement of compulsory school attendance from 16 to 18 years old. My understanding was if a student is under 18 and they wanted to leave, it required the signature of the mother or the father. Okay. Well, now I guess if they're going to 16 and not need that. Not smart.
Well, that's just been put forward, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay,
So I have
all right. Thank you, Ms. Jones. All right, it is 8:13 p.m. and we're going to open the meeting to the public for the second time, this time either for any items related to or not related to the agenda this evening at 8:13 p.m. Okay, seeing no comments, we're going to close the meeting at 8:13 p.m. We do have a need to go into executive session. For one student issue, one contract issue, should be out for about 5 minutes or so. Need a motion? No action to be taken. Need a motion to go into executive session. Mr. Mazzone, seconded by Mr. Sprayberry. All in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you. We're in executive session.